We're on a road trip today, sports fans. You may see behind me a tarpaulin with just the faintest hint of a bicycle shape underneath it. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the one. This is probably the bike to end them all. As a bike collector, this is the most important bike that I will ever have in my collection. I'm not going to reveal too much at this stage. What I can tell you is that this lad and I have been on quite a road trip. We've covered some distance to go and collect this bike. Next stop is the city of Manchester to go and get a couple of parts from a vintage bike dealer that I know to finish it off. What I can also tell you is this is a bike that I would have gone to some lengths to get in any condition. Even if somebody'd found one in a skip, I would have paid money for it and gone to great lengths to restore it. But on this occasion, I've actually found one that requires very little, if any, restoration. So this video is going to be a relatively short one, but I hope nevertheless you will see the significance when I unveil it. Here we are in town, getting ready to take our precious cargo home. Now, what can we see through the privacy glass? Oh, nothing. Okay, sneak preview then. So, we can see a knotted front hub, a heavy steel fork, a battered mud guard. Fact is, this is not going to be the most exotic bike in my collection by a long way. No carbon, no titanium. We're talking about a heavy steel, late 80s mountain bike. But in terms of rarity, it is the tooth of the hen, and it is incredibly special. Okay, I think it's time to explain. There is no bike that will ever make you as excited. You'll never have that emotional, visceral connection to a bike more than you do for that first grown-up bike that you had. All cyclists will know this. The first time you move from your sort of plasticky BMX that you had at primary school up to a grown-up bike, that's the bike you'll always daydream about, the bike you'll always wish you'd kept. I certainly wish I kept mine, but it sort of got upgraded out of existence and ended up in landfills many decades ago. And I've had the search set up on eBay for years to find one in any kind of condition. And I've got all the original pictures. I've got the catalogue that I used to sit and stare at as an 11-year-old. And finally, I found one. And not only have I found one that has barely been used. It is in pretty much pristine condition. So it's going to be time for the unveil. And in case you think I'm exaggerating, here we are back in my place of work, and as you're about to see, top floor corner office, on the wall above the throne itself, framed and preserved for history, is the exact page from the Madison catalogue of 1988 with the Ridgeback 602 SIS. Now all that's left of the Ridgeback I had in '88 is this pair of chewed up plastic brake levers that my tiny daughter is now brandishing. Because the fact is that over the years as a kid, I upgraded my Ridgeback bit by bit as I smashed it up and wore it out, until eventually I had the new group set on a new frame in '93 and it sort of turned into this. So rather like Trigger's Broom or the lineup of the Sugar Babes, the Ridgeback bit by bit ceased to exist. And then decades later, I rather regretted this, long after the parts had all gone to landfill. But then, as luck would have it, here is what must surely be the most perfect example of a complete 602 SIS still in existence. Just as a brief aside, I happened to get a glance at the horrific state of this XTR crank in daylight, so I'm still welcoming any viewer suggestions on how I can restore it to this kind of XTR satin finish that it's meant to look like. I really don't trust myself with sandpaper. Anyway, back to the matter at hand, and the fact is there was nothing quite so exotic back in '88. Nevertheless, we must not underestimate how significant this bike was. Although X-Age Trail was pretty entry level, and of course XT did exist in '88, don't forget that as an 11-year-old, particularly when nobody you know has ever heard of a mountain bike, this bike was Area 51 alien technology to my tiny brain. Things like a chainstay mounted U-brake, the concept of gears, let alone indexed gears, and these amazing aero looking shifters and levers. The first example of STI, this total integration idea where the shifters are directly mounted to the levers, and things like even a quick release seat pin to a child's brain and to all my mates was considered to be quite the coolest thing in the world. Sadly, actually, despite the picture in the catalogue showing quick release hubs, they actually came nutted, as they have done on this bike as well, which I do remember was always a niggling upset back in the day, but it is original, so I'm keeping it that way. So, the bad and the good. This isn't the original saddle, although it's period correct. This would have been swapped out at the time. The original would have been a plastic Madison with a leaf spring in it, which I binned back in the day anyway and put a rolls on. This time I'm going to take the liberty of putting an Avocet on. Likewise, these mudguards were put on by the elderly gentleman that owned this bike, as well as the homemade chainstay protector, which was a touch of genius, because when I take this off, this will be completely unmarked. Other than that, it's exactly as you see in the pictures. The only rust that's on it is sort of surface corrosion from its years in a garage. You can tell it's barely been ridden because these are the original X-Age brake blocks and they're barely worn. The tyres as well, these kind of New Track is the brand. I remember upgrading these quite quickly because they weren't chunky enough, but these are the original ones that were in the 88 catalogue. So this time I'm going to preserve them. Also, as a child, I'd have taken off the reflectors to make it look a bit more stealthy. My little mechanic helper here is also going to help me take the chain off. I'll probably bin it and replace it with like for like because it's a bit corroded. But apart from the odd scratch from where it's been clearly bundled around from garage to shed, this thing is incredible, and I don't think it's going to take long to get it absolutely gleaming. This thing's in such great nick that I don't even need to take it apart. Apart from some sticky residue from whoever put 3-in-1 oil on it over the last 3 decades, it really doesn't need much attention. Now, there's 2 ways of telling if vintage bike parts have had a hard life, even when they're immaculately clean. And that is wear on the contact areas, and as you can see, there is minimal, if any, in this case, and that's definitely the original jockey wheel. And the second thing is corrosion inside any steel bolts, especially on a rear mech. You're always going to see a bit of rust deep inside this bolt, and in this case there is absolutely none. There's really only the bottle cage bolts that have got a bit of surface corrosion on them, but we can very soon fix that. There you go, 24 hours in white vinegar. That really is amazing. There's absolutely no rust left. It really does work. I can't believe I haven't mentioned this BioPace yet. All you Team Sky fans who have been spending big money putting elliptical chain rings on your Pinarellos for the last 10 years. I had this in 88, which makes me the godfather, or it certainly did when I was 11. This really was alien technology to my tiny brain back then. Amazing how they went out of fashion in the early 90s and now are back and significantly more expensive. I must admit, I don't remember ever really noticing any huge difference in performance. In fact, I did race on a BioPace a few times and I can tell you I did not win. So there's your proof. every penny of my pocket money when I was a kid went on aftermarket upgrades. As soon as I'd accumulated £6 or even £7, it was straight off to Davis Brothers Cycles in Chester to see what such wealth would get. And unbelievably, these three little trinkets, well, two of them are actually original. This is the shark fin that I got to put on the Ridgeback back in the late 80s. This would only have been about £6.99 back in the day. Obviously, it costs more than a Koh-i-Noor diamond nowadays. Likewise, this Elite bottle cage, I'm pretty sure these would have been £4.99 or £5.99. So you can bet that, well, this is actually the original one that I had. So that's going back on. These Odie grips are not original, they're brand new. These are also more expensive than a medium-sized family home nowadays. I think I must have bought the last reasonably priced pair on the entire internet. So these three little upgrades are going on the Ridgeback and are entirely justifiable and faithful to the original because they're exactly what I did back at the time. This Avocet saddle is short, wide, and I've just noticed has a tiny W on it, which means one thing. It means it's actually intended to be a women's saddle. But to be honest, I'm still going to put it on the Ridgeback because it's very similar in dimensions to the original one that came with the bike, which is apparently long gone. But crucially, it's period correct. And it is a lot nicer than the original. It's actually the brand that I would have put on in '88 had I been able to afford it, because this brand of saddle, Avocet, was advertised all over MB UK magazine at the time, and I remember as a kid really wanting one. Certainly if you look at the Kona that I've got here, which is a very high-end and desirable bike, it came as standard with an Avocet saddle, which is a thing of beauty. So I think the only indulgence I'm going to permit myself for the Ridgeback in terms of a non-standard upgrade is going to be this. It's actually a real nostalgic treat to be servicing one of these old-style cup and cone bottom brackets. Ever since the late 90s, we've been replacing these with sealed cartridge units, which means I haven't actually had the pleasure of repacking one of these with grease by hand for so many years. This one clearly hasn't been opened since the day it left the factory in, I guess, Taiwan in the 80s. So what we're going to find inside, I don't know, but probably not enough grease. It's immaculate though, it's as good as new. The way this thing glides back in, it's clear these threads have never seen daylight. This is the original multi-tool I got with my Ridgeback back in 88, and it has lived in my toolkit ever since. It's the only tool I still possess that has this bottom bracket lock ring spanner on it. So today, for the first time in decades, it's proving its value. One very stupid modification that I made to my original Ridgeback, which I won't be repeating, was to move the controls as far inboard as they would go and then saw off the ends of the bars to get them as narrow as possible. And there were lads at my school that had it so narrow that their lever hoods were touching in the middle. There were two reasons why we all did this back in about 1990. First of all, the trendsetters in mountain biking, in early mountain biking, were city bike couriers, and they were chopping their handlebars down so they could weave in and out of New York or London traffic. So he would see them in the magazines and want to be cool like them. And the second reason is a lot of pro mountain bikers in the very early days of the sport came from careers on the road. And of course, roadies, you'll see them when they're on mountain bikes, they climb like this, or they'll tuck down like this, or they'll sit up like this. They don't tend to use the widest extent of the bars. So both the pros and the couriers were the coolest guys in the world that we'd ever seen at the time, and we wanted to be like them. I will not be sawing off this bar. In fact, if you look at my modern mountain bikes, like the S-Works Epic, the bars are quite the opposite. The fashion now, and quite rightly so, is for as wide as you can get. And it's such an obvious improvement. It's unbelievable that we didn't recognise this fact at the time. But I'm sticking with this just how it should be. Here we are again with the budget hairspray. Obviously only the finest hairspray goes anywhere near my fabulous voluminous hair, but this is quite the stuff for the workshop, specifically for handlebar grips. These U-brakes are a curious thing. There is no denying that it was twice as powerful as the cantilever brakes. You can tell just by the length of these arms how much leverage you had, and you could lock this thing up and skid for days. But as you can see from this bizarre undercarriage shot, the chainstay mounting location was rather weird and has thankfully died out, because whilst it was fine for bikes in the 80s in California, where of course mountain biking began, that spent their lives on dry, dusty, sun-baked trails, try riding one of these through the peat swamps of Delamere Forest. After about 20 minutes, this whole area was completely clogged with mud, and you were basically riding all day with your brake just going on your rims. So yeah, U-brakes are great, but hiding them behind the chain rings, not so much. Also, very, very hard to adjust down here, because you're trying to get the spanner in there and you just get your knuckles taken apart by the chain rings teeth. So here it is, a 32-year-old bike that must be the lowest mileage and most unmarked condition of my entire collection. This thing really is special. I'll save the superlatives, because obviously this means so much more to me than it will to any of you. But suffice it to say that if you stay tuned to this channel, there's plenty more rare and special and interesting bikes coming. And whilst they won't hold such a place in my heart as this one does, I hope they'll be worth watching. But for now, thanks for watching, and leave your stories in the comments below about that first bike that you had that's as exciting to you as this one is to me.